6th position. As for Stevenson down in 7th, lock up though for Cameron Das, who can't get it turned in. Our race leader has locked up, going round the Hungaroring. He loses the lead, he's lost 2nd place. Will he lose 3rd? Budapest goes through for the lead. Camilla Gomez now get down the inside. Problem for Cameron Das, big crash for Cameron Das, back into the gravel.
Welcome everyone. If you're new to the channel, this is the series where I do a deep dive on all the good, bad, and ugly that happens during my race weekends in the Euroformula Open Championship. We're going to go into detail into all the major drama that happened throughout this past weekend, and believe me, there is plenty. I mean, we managed to total a car without crashing, we had a brake failure while leading a race, I nearly missed the start because of a thunderstorm, and that's honestly just the tip of the iceberg. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So just to bring everyone up to speed in case you haven't seen any of the previous recaps, so far we've completed 3 out of 9 race weekends with a total of 4 wins and 7 podiums. You're now joining us in Budapest after a very tough weekend at Spa-Francorchamps in Belgium. Compared to Spa, the Hungaroring is virtually the opposite in every way, shape, and form. Spa is a low downforce track with long straights and plenty of overtaking opportunities, whereas Hungaroring is very tight, twisty, with very short straights and ultra high downforce, so it's really tough to overtake. Because we put so much extra downforce on the car to increase quartering grip, you have something called aero wash, which is basically the disruption of the air when following another car, which really limits your grip. And unless you have massive pace advantage over the car in front of you, it's pretty much impossible to overtake them. Now, because of these aero wash challenges that Budapest presents, I really thought that this was going to be a boring weekend, at least compared to a track like Spa. But man, was I wrong. Now we're going to rewind a little bit further than I normally do for these recaps, but I think it's very important to cover it because it really all had such a tremendous influence on how the weekend ended up. On Thursday, we had a full day of testing where I ended up successfully coming out as the quickest driver in the quickest car, so we were looking pretty good going into Friday's free practice. Friday consisted of our final 2 practice sessions. This is really our last chance to dial in the car, so everyone naturally is still fully testing the limits in order to maximize qualifying on Saturday morning. And in my case, I actually went a little bit over the limit in Friday's morning session. Now it might not look like much, but this little bit of bottoming on the exit curve of turn 4 actually caused some structural damage to the chassis of the car. Now it's not something I felt while driving, but it's one of those things where over time it can worsen and it can actually cause some performance loss because of that structural damage worsening over time. So as soon as the mechanics discovered the issue, they immediately started stripping the car and rebuilding it from scratch. There were only 4 hours between free practice 1 and free practice 2, and it was looking like it was going to be impossible to fix the car in time. But miraculously, I think due to everyone just putting in a helping hand, they were actually able to repair the car just in time for me to get a few shakedown laps in at the end of FP2. It was really an impressive feat to see a car built up that fast. It was really incredible. But it was a really good thing that they were able to do that, and I was able to drive for a few laps at the end of FP2 because there were a few small issues that needed ironing out. Nothing major, but something that would have caused a problem in qualifying for sure had they gone unnoticed. So in a single make championship, everyone has the exact same model of chassis so that everything is fair. But it's actually physically impossible for every chassis to be exactly the same. The manufacturer has very tight tolerances, of course, but each chassis really needs to be tuned individually. This is normally something we figure out through extensive testing before the season, or at least before a race weekend, but in this case, we only had about 5 or 6 laps in free practice 2 on some old tires in 100+ degree Fahrenheit weather to figure out what the differences were, which is really nearly impossible. So we were going into quali slightly blind. The new chassis balance was definitely not tuned to our usual standard, but we still came away with a P2 in quali despite having some tuning inefficiencies and a small mistake that I made in turn 11 while driving, so I think we can be relatively happy with the ability to start on the front row where a win is definitely possible. Here we are starting the first race of the weekend. The front row is a great place to start, but P2 really puts me on the dirty side of the track. But the good news is if I have a good start, I'll actually have the inside for turn 1 already. You can see just how hot it is in the car with that leaf blower blowing air into my helmet. I mean, the air temp was around 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and track temp at this point was exceeding 130 degrees. So tire temperature management would be a huge topic for this 18-lap race.
Willing their drivers to go well. The green flag will fly at the back, signaling we are ready to go racing. It is all eyes to the lights and foot to the floor, and we are racing in Hungary. It looks like a decent start from Jack Crawford though, but has to cut across third place man. That is Cameron Dassey. Looks like he might have that inside line, but look for Louis Foster in the blue and black car as well on the outside. Jack Crawford forced into the middle of that sandwich. He has to make sure he doesn't get his front wing done, but no, Louis Foster unfortunately a victim there.
So looking back at this moment in slow motion, Jack had a weak start off the line, so Louis and I were both able to pull alongside of him in turn 1. Everything is looking clean up until the apex, but I think Louis just pinched inwards just before Jack had the chance to bail out, so luckily I came away with no contact and the lead was mine for the taking. From this point, the strategy was pretty simple for me. Just drive as fast as I can without overheating the tires and hope no safety cars come out. But unfortunately, that's just not the direction the race went in.
That's the issue, because otherwise he'll get penalty.
Well, Philip Caminiar's currently in 6th position. Casper Stevens is down in 7th. Lock up though for Cameron Dass, who can't get it turned in. Our race leader has locked up going round the Hungaroring. He loses the lead. He's lost 2nd place. Will he lose 3rd? Bolibasi goes through for the lead. Kavina Gomez now get down the inside. Problem for Cameron Dass. Big crash for Cameron Dass. Back into the gravel.
And that was my first ever brake failure. There was really no warning before it happened, but I was really lucky for it to have happened in a sort of relatively slow speed section of the track with quite a bit of runoff. Really the only bit of warning was here in turn 4, where I dabbed the brakes just for a little bit of rotation and the pedal felt kind of soft, so I kind of missed the apex a little bit, which was strange. And then there wasn't much time to think about it, but then going into turn 5, I go and hit my normal brake point and the pedal goes straight to the floor. As soon as I realized what was happening, I started pumping the brakes, which is why you see the tire smoke coming on and off. Now what was really strange after I started doing that pumping was the pedal actually went stiff again. And for a moment I thought maybe it was just some weird fluke and that car was actually going to be working just fine now. So I floored it to try and get back on track and try not to lose any more positions than I had to. And I went into turn 6 with the assumption that the brakes were just going to work again. But of course, as soon as I went to hit the brakes, it went straight to the floor again. And you can see in that little brake trace in the bottom right that I'm pumping as much as I possibly can to get any sort of deceleration, but nothing comes. So I end up having to use the gravel as my brake pedal. There was a lot of damage to the car, but luckily nothing that wasn't repairable for Sunday's races. But this would mean that I would have to start dead last for race 2, and I of course lost what would have been my first win in Budapest, which I would say is probably the track I've struggled at the most in my career up to this point. So it was very disappointing. So after the mechanics had a chance to check over the car, they found that a seal had actually broke on the right rear caliper, and hence why I lost brake pressure fluid. It was really a freak accident and no one was truly at fault. But it definitely puts into perspective how quickly things can go wrong without a mistake even happening. With regards to race 2, there really isn't much to talk about. We were expecting torrential rain, but it actually came right after the race. I was really hoping and praying for it, but because of this track being nearly impossible to overtake in the dry, I was hoping that we would be able to do some overtaking in the wet. I also ended up having a technical issue with my steering wheel on the formation lap, so I essentially started the race from pit lane. While that meant I couldn't really card my way through the field like I wanted to, it did mean that I could go for fastest quali lap for the 3rd and final race of the weekend, and luckily, we succeeded in getting that fastest lap. So all day after race 2 in the morning, there were thunderstorms off and on, but the sun came out and dried the track just before the start of race 3. I didn't really mind whether or not it was wet or dry, but considering I was starting on pole and how difficult it is to overtake in the dry, I thought that the quote-unquote easiest option was if the race was actually dry. But right as I was about to hop in the car, a huge thunderstorm rolled in, which caused some major panic in the paddock, and especially in our garage. It was a lot of rain, so the cars actually needed to be converted to a full wet setup. That normally entails raising ride heights to minimize hydroplaning, softening roll bars, throwing on wet tires, among a bunch of other things, which can be done in usually about 15 to 20 minutes. But the timing of the rain was so close to the start of the race that it really caused a lot of panic. On top of that, my teammate Vivian required an engine change, and that engine problem was only discovered 1 hour prior to the start of the race. So the mechanics were all hands on deck on her car right when the rain came. I mean, we were dangerously close to missing the start, but the boys somehow pulled it off, and we were ready to start the final race of the weekend from pole position. Due to the conditions, the race would have to start behind the safety car. My radio wasn't working for some reason, so I was completely in the dark. The standing water on the track was incredible. I mean, I had driven in the wet at Budapest once before, so I knew it was one of the worst tracks for drainage in Europe. I mean, turn 10 in particular is the worst for hydroplaning. It's not even considered a corner in the dry, but even at these slow speeds on the safety car with this amount of water on track, I could feel the car hydroplaning already. After 4 laps behind the safety car, I finally saw the green flag. I was expecting another safety car to come out after the first lap just because of the amount of standing water in turn 10. At least being in the front, I could sort of see the amount of water there, and I could maybe try and avoid it, but for sure the people stuck in the spray behind me couldn't see it at all. And I kind of expected a crash would happen there. I actually nearly went off on the first lap as well, but luckily I just barely kept it on the tarmac.
I think this was where Louis Foster went off and Josh Mason. They both went off in the same place.
Yeah, so Foster went off at turn 10, but he kept it on the grass patch. Yeah, so now Mason's gone over the grass and then onto the bounce where the gravel is.
Oh, and did he just about keep it out of the wall?
And as I predicted, the safety car was deployed as the result of a car going off in turn 10. Actually, several cars went off in turn 10, but at different times. There was so much standing water there that one car even went off under safety car. The incident was cleaned up after a couple of laps, and it was time to go racing again. At this point, the rain stopped, so the track was actually going to start forming a driest line. While my pace was good up to this point, I would need to adapt my race line to where the driest parts of the circuit were, and that could change from lap to lap.
When they make their way through into that middle sector, but right now at the start of this lap, we are back underway here in Hungary. It is Cameron Das who leads the way from Villagomez and Asman, and look at the spray still being kicked up here. Villagomez sticking with him though. The rest of the cars jostle for position, trying to find a part of the track where they're not being affected by the spray from the car in front of them.
The rest of the race was pretty straightforward. I followed my gut and adapted to the track as it was drying, and I made sure not to make a single mistake. Going into the race, I was actually a bit more nervous than usual because of my relative inexperience in racing in the wet. I can't remember the exact number, but I've only had a handful of races in the wet, and none of them resulted in a win, so that was somewhat in the back of my mind heading into the race. After the first lap though, I saw the car behind couldn't keep up, and I didn't crash while keeping that pace, so I knew from that point on that the win was certainly possible, so long as I remained focused and adaptive. And the culmination of all that effort yielded a 6.8 second gap when I came across the line to win the third and final race of the weekend. It was such a relief knowing all the trauma the team went through all weekend, and that's not just the case for me and my mechanics, but really everyone on the team suffered in one way or another at some point during the weekend.
In only the penultimate race lap, but it will be Cameron Das who will come round the final corner here at the Hungaroring. He hasn't put a foot wrong in these challenging conditions for race 3. Cameron Das will cross the line to take yet another win in Euro Formula Open and extend his championship.
Cameron Das back to P1 in the most difficult race of the season, probably.
Yeah, I'm really happy with that result. We've had a really challenging weekend. We had to replace the chassis on Friday. There were some tuning differences we needed to make for the new chassis in quali, so we weren't quite there in quali. And then we had a brake failure in race 1 when we were leading the race. So we've kind of had it all so far, but it's really good to be back on the top position.
How wet it was?
In the beginning, it was really difficult because turn 11 especially, even when we were behind the safety car, we were hydroplaning, even at those low speeds in first gear. So I was a bit nervous for the first lap, being the first one to go through there at full speed. I think I nearly went off, to be quite honest, but kept it on the track and just put in solid laps after that.
Well done. It's good for the championship, and you're still there. Well done.
And that just about sums up my weekend in Budapest. So as I mentioned before, the mechanics and engineers worked so hard all weekend with all the issues we had and the bad weather. So our success really wasn't possible if it weren't for the perseverance that those guys had all weekend long. As always, a big thank you goes to System X Ceramic Coatings for making all this possible. And with that being said, I'm gonna see you guys very shortly for our next race weekend taking place in Imola. So stay tuned and see you on the next one.